Okay.
Okay.
Wait, computer.
Um,
Okay.
so do amylases break down disaccharides into monosaccharides?
Yes.
Okay.
Di
And
means two. And so, yeah, they split like lactose into glucose and galactose, or maltose into glucose and glucose. Yeah.
mhm. Okay. And why is carbohydrate and protein breakdown less complex? Is it because they're like hydrophilic, so they don't need to be emulsified?
Very good. Yes, that's exactly right. And because the fats are hydrophobic, and so they need to somehow they need to be packaged so that they can go into the hydrophilic bloodstream.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what first they're broken up and they repackaged into the mice cell, and then they enter into the intestinal cell and they become that chylomicron. Yeah.
Okay. And can we just like go through that process again? Because I'm like kind of confused. My
Sure.
notes aren't like organized. There's like arrows everywhere, and I'm not sure like which step comes after each one.
Okay. So what you need to remember is, so we break down triglycerides into glycerol, which is the 3-carbon backbone, monoglycerides, and fatty acids. And
Okay.
the fatty acids can be short chain, medium chain, or long chain, depending on the number of carbons in the fatty acid chain.
Mm-hmm.
So the smaller numbered carbon molecules, that would be glycerol, short chain and medium chain fatty acids, because they are smaller, they're more hydrophilic. So they go through the intestinal cell into the bloodstream, like
Okay.
amino acids and glucose.
So they go directly to the bloodstream
Right, they go
from the
through,
intestinal cells?
yeah, so if we watch
Okay.
my face, so right, we're in the intestinal lumen, the enzymes now are on the, the outside of the intestinal cell, the enzymes have broken it down, they go through the intestinal cell into the bloodstream because they are
Okay.
hydrophilic.
Okay. Okay.
But the hydrophobic molecules, the monoglycerides and the long chain fatty acids, have to be packaged differently. So they form this micelle. They kind of circle together according to the picture. They enter into the intestinal cell, and there in the intestinal cell, they are packaged with the other members of the fat family, the phospholipid, the cholesterol, but also a protein coat, because that protein coat is what helps to transport the fat from the lymphatic system to the bloodstream. But anyway, so because protein is hydrophilic. So you have all of these things forming the chylomicron, which is the first of a family of lipoproteins. Lipo meaning fat. Protein is the protein coat that's part of this chylomicron. All right, so
Okay.
then it moves through the intestinal cell in this package, goes into what's called the lymph system, and then it goes into the bloodstream.
Okay.
And
So
there,
the
depending on genetics, diet, whatever, it gets broken into LDLs or HDLs, and ultimately gets broken down and used by the cell for whatever the cell needs the carbons for.
Okay. So do all of the mice, or does the micelle get packaged with all of the lipoproteins or just the chylomicron?
The micelle is kind of the step before the chylomicron. The micelle is
Okay.
outside the intestinal cells, and the micelle is what enters into the intestinal cell and then meets up with the protein and the phospholipid and the cholesterol.
Okay. And for those lipoproteins, are like they all ways of transporting things through the body? Like are they all considered like transporters?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
One of the functions of proteins is transport.
Hmm.
Lipoproteins are proteins that transport lipids.
Okay. And is pepsinogen, is that just a way of like breaking down is it just an enzyme that like breaks down polypeptide chains?
Okay, that's a good question. So pepsinogen is an inactive form of pepsin.
Okay.
So like GEN means generates
Mm-hmm.
pepsin, because protein enzymes are proteins, and proteins are broken down in the acid of the stomach. So we have to have this pepsin as a form that can survive in the stomach without being broken down. And that molecule is pepsinogen. When protein enters the stomach to be digested, there's a series of reactions that converts the inactive precursor, if you will, to pepsin, which can then start to break down polypeptide chains. And then ultimately that pepsin itself will get digested because it's a protein.
So pepsinogen is inactive and then it gets converted to pepsin, which is the active enzyme.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And then I'm kind of just confused about like what peristalsis, bolus, and sphincters, like what those three things are.
It's been a while. So give me one at a time and I'll tell you what they are.
Peristalsis.
Peristalsis are wave-like contractions that move the contents, the digestive contents, from your mouth through your throat, through your digestive system. So it's just wave-like contractions.
Okay. And then bolus.
Bolus is what we call the stuff that what'd you have for breakfast?
Peanut butter toast with banana.
So it started out as peanut butter toast and banana, and as you chewed it and it mixed with saliva and whatever, it became a bolus.
Okay.
It's not any specific thing, it's all things.
Okay. And then sphincters.
Sphincters are valves that separate one digestive organ from another. So we have the cardiac sphincter that separates the esophagus from the stomach.
Okay.
We have the pyloric sphincter that separates the lower part of the stomach from the small intestine.
Okay.
And we have what's called the ileocecal valve. Ileo is the lower part of the small intestine. Cecal is another name for large intestine. And that's the sphincter that connects the small intestine to the large intestine.
Okay.
And then there's the anal sphincter through which everything gets excreted that hasn't been digested and absorbed.
Okay. And the video that we had to watch for class that day, is there like an explanation of the entire process of what happens? I won't make you repeat it, but like, is it in that video?
Entire process of what
So like
happened.
it starts in the mouth and then it goes like through here to there.
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I know I drew everything across the board.
Yeah, I took a picture of that.
Okay. Can you look at that? I don't know if that's in
Yeah.
the video.
Yeah, I'll look at that. And is it in the Body Atlas video?
In a number of ways it is, but it's not in a step-by-step process
Okay.
like I did
Okay.
on the board.
Yeah, then I'll bank on it being in the picture. Okay.
Oh, I didn't put my background in. Wait, you can see how messy my house is. Wait. Oh, that's nice. No, let's go to my office. It's the little things I have to do to keep myself amused.
No, I like the Hogwarts. It's nice.
Thank you.
And then for photosynthesis and fiber, are prebiotics and resistant starch the same
Yes.
thing? Okay.
For our purposes, yes.
Okay. And then, so when you're looking at like the difference between soluble and insoluble fiber, why does it matter if like it attracts water or not?
That's a really good question. And in a couple years, we'll have other categories of fiber.
Mm-hmm.
They'll talk about fermentable versus non-fermentable. It's just a way of separating them for, I'm not sure why, to confuse students.
Okay.
But what I do want you to remember is that it's the soluble fiber is the one that may help lower blood cholesterol levels. And I went through that mechanism, you know, how it binds to bile, and bile is made from cholesterol. So when you excrete bile, in order to make new bile, you have to draw on cholesterol that's in the body, and that may help lower blood cholesterol levels.
Okay.
Yeah. Didn't work for me, but you know, it might work for somebody else. I blame my parents, as we all do.
Oh, for everything. Always.
Absolutely. It's our fault. I mean, it's their fault, and now it's my fault, but yes.
Um, what is the difference between diverticulosis and diverticulitis?
So itis means inflammation. Diverticulosis is what's I'm trying to think of, asymptomatic. You can have diverticulosis and not know it. It
Okay.
would be diagnosed when you have a colonoscopy. But diverticulitis would be if one of those pouches or more became inflamed. Like tonsillitis is inflamed tonsils.
Mm-hmm.
Appendicitis is inflamed appendix. So diverticulitis is inflamed diverticula. And that's when people might need antibiotics if they become infected. Worst case scenario is surgery, but that's the absolute worst case. A low fiber diet would be what's recommended for diverticulitis. Otherwise, it's recommended to have a high fiber diet like everybody else.
So if you have diverticulosis, you don't necessarily know it.
Right.
Okay. And is that so then at what point do you have diverticular disease? Is that in both cases?
That's a good question. Self-disclosure, I have diverticulosis. I couldn't tell. I didn't know.
Okay.
I don't know how
Okay.
long I had it. I've never had a
Mhm.
problem with it. So do I have diverticular disease? I don't know.
Okay. So it's just under the category, I guess.
I
Okay.
guess, yeah. No, that's a good question. I haven't thought about it. Yeah.
Okay. And then why does insoluble fiber decrease transit time if it's not attracting water? Or why does it I guess I'm kind of confused
Yes,
about
no, that's a very fair question because it does in its own way attract fluid. It's that sponge, and the sponge works better if it's wet, if it's soft. So
okay.
you need to drink fluid whether you're having soluble or insoluble fiber. You need to make sure you're hydrated. Otherwise, it's a dry sponge moving through your colon, which is uncomfortable and slow. Whereas when there's water, it's softer, and it decreases transit time, which means it moves faster, right? If
Okay.
you increase transit time, it takes longer.
Mm-hmm.
If you decrease transit time, it takes less time.
So there was the benefits where it decreased transit time but increased the amount of time it spends in the GI tract or something. It was the opposite. I'm trying to
Oh,
remember.
and it might be in the stomach because it pulls water. It might make you feel fuller longer.
So how does it make you feel fuller if you're emptying quicker?
Well, okay, so you have to go back and think of the digestive tract. The stomach is up higher in the
Mm-hmm.
digestive tract than the colon. So when you eat a high fiber meal and you drink water, it's going to just physically take up more space because
Okay.
the fiber will become a soft sponge. And
Okay.
so you get feelings of fullness. Then as you digest it, okay, then, we're talking about the affecting transit time when you get to the large intestine.
Okay. So digesting is not going on in the stomach?
Um, Mechanical digesting of carbohydrate goes on in the stomach. There's not chemical digestion. Remember that
Okay.
amylase is
Yeah.
broken down, so it's mechanical, and that's
Okay.
what's happening in the stomach. Some people feel fuller when they eat fiber. Other people don't. So
Okay. Okay. And then sorry. For the carbohydrate disorders, what is pre-diabetes? How do you classify that?
it has to do with blood sugar, when your blood sugars are between what's considered non-diabetic and diabetic. So I'll throw some numbers at you. I think they're on a slide. If a fasting blood sugar, were you the one that asked about if a fasting blood sugar is under 100, then that's non-diabetic. If a fasting blood sugar is over 126, that's diabetic. So you have that gray area in there that may be pre-diabetes. But
Okay.
it's not just blood, but it might not be your blood sugars. It's also part of that metabolic syndrome. So if you have
Okay.
that blood sugar value, you would, in between that range, you would want to test again. It might just be one bad test.
Okay. And then are the polys like the diabetic polys, like the 3 warning signs, like increased hunger, thirst, and something else?
First, polydipsia, polyphagia, polyuria, increased hunger. Polydipsia, increased thirst. Polyphagia, increased hunger. Polyuria, increased urination. Those are symptoms. You can have those symptoms and not be diabetic. There's a long
Okay.
explanation as to why those are the symptoms, but you don't need to know them.
Okay.
Your classmates thank you because I'm going to save this and post it.
Well, like, I, like, in class, I just, like, scribble things down, and then I go back, and I'm like, I have no idea what this means anymore. And I, like, draw arrows, and it's been so long, so I'm just like, I have literally no idea what any of
I respect that. And that's part of the open book, open notes, open sesame.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that'll be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And then for the lipids and heart disease and cancer, when do polyunsaturated fatty acids get oxidized? Like, what makes that happen?
It happens during the digestive process. If we're talking about in the body, they can become oxidized by free radicals in the digestive tract, and the concern is that those free radicals then lead to the conditions that may make you develop high blood pressure or heart disease or those, some of those chronic illnesses. Are we talking about in the body or in food?
In the body that, like, leads to oxidation.
So there are processes in the body that cause oxidation. Oxidation is part of digestion. It's part of our immune response. So it's when there's an excess of oxidation in relation to when you have an excess of oxidation, you have too many free radicals in relation to, let's say, the antioxidants that are protective. That's called oxidative stress. And that's when you might be at risk for chronic illness. And polyunsaturated fats, it's the double bond that can be unstable. And the concern is that that's what can become oxidized. And that's also what becomes hydrogenated and forms trans fatty acids.
Okay.
But that's during food processing.
So if something is, like, partially hydrogenated, does that mean then not all of the double bonds have been removed?
That's right.
Okay. And then, so there was something somewhere about, oxidized LDL. Is that just the same thing as oxidation, or is that, like, two separate things? And, like,
that's a good question. Oxidized LDLs are also sometimes called foam cells, and that's what gets into the cell, the arterial membrane, and causes plaque.
Okay.
And that's what increases heart disease risk.
So that happens during inflammation? Okay.
I mean, for our purposes, we're finding categories of things, but these could be happening all the time. And depending on what's going on in the body, it might go in one direction or the other. But for the categories for exams and teaching, yeah, we have them in different boxes.
So is inflammation different than developing a clot?
Yes. Yeah, we have inflammation for any number of reasons. We have inflammation that happens when you sprain your ankle. You have inflammation going on. Inflammation, if you have a splinter, you have inflammation going on. The thing is that with heart disease, that inflammation is inside the body. It's inside the artery. And if you have heart disease, if you have high blood pressure, or if you have high triglycerides, then the body seems to think of that as an injury, and it's not stopping. And so this inflammation keeps going on, and that's what may bring the blood clot to form. You have that cap that may form on top of plaque. And if you have high blood pressure that ruptures that cap, or triglycerides because the blood is thick that ruptures that plaque, that causes even a greater immune response. I think the slide called it thrombogenesis, and thrombo means clot. And that brings red blood cells, or actually platelets, that can cause the clot. So that's inflammation going on inside the arteries.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's an immune response. It's your immune system that can be involved in heart disease. Yeah.
Okay. And then For the blood lipids involved that are involved in heart disease, is that your serum triglycerides and the LDL and
Yeah.
HDL?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Um, and then what's the difference between, or do we have to know the difference between systolic and diastolic blood pressure? Okay.
If you were in
And
my
then
health and disease class, maybe, but not this one.
okay. And then so when we were talking about the difference between aerobic and anaerobic activity the other day during class, I'm
Mhm.
kind of confused about like why you would want lactic acid in the case of doing high intensity exercises. Like, is it because of the Cori cycle and the fact that like not all of your glycogen is broken down, so you can like continually like so you can like keep breaking it down to like get more glucose? Is that the idea behind it? Like, I guess I'm just kind of like confused about
No,
what
that's not
about
it.
lactic acid makes it better.
Well, I think lactic acid is formed. Okay, so it's formed during high intensity, short duration activities. And that's why those activities are short, because lactic acid fatigues the muscle fiber. And
Okay.
that's what causes you to stop. Your body can't, we've evolved to not be able to be active at high intensity exercise for long periods of time. So
Mhm.
lactic acid, if I mean, I've never looked at the evolutionary benefit of why we produce lactic acid. I just know that lactic acid itself causes muscle fibers to fatigue, and that causes pain, and that makes you slow down. Whether or not it's because would we eventually die from not getting enough oxygen in our blood?
Mhm.
That's an interesting hypothesis. But that's what so lactic acid doesn't provide as much energy as if you were aerobically breaking down glucose, but it provides enough for those high intensity exercises. And it's sort of a feedback mechanism that tells you to stop before your muscle fibers are fatigued. And I don't know what happens when they get over fatigued, but you can injure yourself, I would imagine.
Okay, that makes sense.
Does that provide an answer?
Yeah, that makes more sense. I was just kind of, I guess I was just like confused. I was like, what about lactic acid like
No,
makes it so special that you would want to use it for like high intensity exercise?
it's not that you want to use it. It's what your body does. It's what's there for your body to use. And it
Mhm.
kind of, this is interesting. It kind of is a feedback mechanism that tells you to slow down, because in the absence of oxygen, you, let's just say for, evolutionary argument, you would die.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it makes you slow down. It makes you take deeper breaths. It makes you get oxygen into the blood so that the rest of your body can get oxygen to the cells.
Okay.
I like that. Thanks. Hmm. Good question.
No, that makes more sense now. I was what is the difference? Like I don't get why you'd want to use one over the other, but yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
No, that was an excellent question.
And then so like what are we just using as like the cutoff point for saying this is aerobic, this is anaerobic, and like you're using carbohydrates or you're using fat? Like is it the 20-minute thing?
Yeah, that last slide that I showed you in the video,
Mhm.
and I think it's probably in the slides on Blackboard. It had things broken down into, the time, the intensity, and what the cutoffs are. So
Okay.
I would use that. Again, everybody's different, but for
Mhm.
exam purposes, that's what you would use.
Okay. All right. I think that's it for now. I might
Okay,
have more later, but I think for right now that's it.
I'm gonna just pause.